Hey everyone, welcome back. Johnny B here with Johnny B Codes, back for our 30 days of API challenge. This is day 5. In the last video, we learned how to display images retrieved from APIs. We also did a little design work, and I think our app is looking pretty good. So the app looks good, but our code is a little bit messy, and at the end of the last lesson, I promised we were going to clean that up. So that is what we are going to be doing in this video. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to do is right now we have all this networking code right here in our view controller, and that's not great. So we're going to extract these functions into its own networking class. Okay, so come over here and I'm going to right click and say new file. This is just going to be a Swift file. I'm going to say next, and we're going to call this our networking, or just a network service. Okay, and we're going to create that, and we're going to say class network service. And this is going to be a singleton. So I'm going to say static let instance equal network service. And then we need our private initializer. So I'm going to say private init. And there we go. So now we have this network service, which is a singleton, so we can access it anywhere in our app. And what we want to do is pull all of those networking functions that are currently in our view controller into here. So we're going to do this one at a time. So I'm going to come over here to our view controller, and our easiest one is this first one, the make fact request. So I'm just going to cut this and then come back to our new network service file. Then I'm just going to open up our view controller in another tab so that I can quickly swap between these two. And I'm going to paste that function. And then I'm also going to go and grab our base URL for the facts. I'm going to cut that, come back over to our network service, and paste that up here as well. All right, so we got our function here, but we're going to need to make a couple changes so that this will work. First off, since we are now going to be calling this function from a class different from the view controller where we use the data, we need some way to pass that data to the view controller once the network request is complete. And the way we do that is through closures, or you might have heard it called a completion handler. Functionally speaking, a completion handler allows you to have some asynchronous task complete, like our network request. And then once it's finished, pass some value into the completion handler to be used at the location of the function invocation, or in other words, here in our view controller where we want to display that information. And the syntax for a completion handler looks like this. And I know it looks a little scary if you haven't used closures much, but used as a completion handler, it is pretty straightforward once you break it down. So first we give it a name. In this case, I have it called completion. You'll also often see it called completed, but it can be named whatever makes sense for that function. And we're going to ignore the @escaping keyword for a minute, and we have this bit here. Parentheses, arrow, parentheses. So whatever you want to pass in the completion handler, or whatever you want available at the location that you call this function, you put that type into the first set of parentheses. So let's go ahead and do that here in our make fact request, okay? So following our syntax, we give it a name. So I'm going to say completion. Then we say @escaping, which again, we're going to cover here in a minute. And then parentheses, arrow, parentheses. And in the first set of parentheses, we set the type of the parameter, the value that we want to pass into the completion handler. So this is of type string, since we are going to be passing back a cat fact string. So then once we have our result from our network request and we want to call our completion handler, we do that simply like this. So here, this is where we have it. We're going to jump back onto the main thread. And previously, when we were in the view controller, we could directly set the cat fact to label, right? But here, we need to go ahead and pass that into the completion handler. So we say completion, and then we say fact. And now, when we call this function over here in the view controller, I'm going to get rid of our old way of calling it. And now we're going to call it through our network service. So I'm going to say network service dot instance, since it's a singleton, dot make fact request. And you might need to save and build in the network service for this autocomplete to show up. So this is the autocomplete for the completion handler right here. We press return and then press return again. And right here, this is the type for whatever is being passed back to us. And we can assign this a variable name, which I'll just call fact. And then here, this is where we use the fact. And we're just going to say self.cat fact label. When you're in a closure, you have to use self to reference class variables like we have up here. So self.cat fact label is equal to, self.catFactLabel.text is equal to fact. There we go. So I'm going to save that. And let's go ahead and test this out real quick. Make sure we're still getting the facts. All right, so I'm going to say get cat fact. And sure enough, we have our cat fact still showing up. So let's run through this one more time. We pulled out our make fact request function into our network service over here. Okay. And we have here our completion handler, which we call once we get what we want. Okay, so right here we have completion, and when we pass in the variable that we want at the point of invocation, which we then have available to us here in the closure. All right, so now let's talk about this escaping attribute here. And this is a concept that takes a while to really sink in, so don't feel bad if you don't immediately fully grasp it, all right? But I'm going to do my best to explain it, but I'm also going to link to some other articles and resources that also do a good job expounding on it, all right? So we have our function here, make fact request, and functions, they run line by line, right? So we do this, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this. And once they run out of lines to execute, they return, or they're done. Their variables are removed from memory. But what about our asynchronous task, right? We're making an API call here. And once the function hits here, it sends off that network request, but it doesn't wait for it to get back. It just continues on its way and returns out of the function. So if we want this variable, our fact, to outlive the function that it's in, it needs to escape the function. Thus we have to give it the aptly named @escaping attribute here. And there is a bit more than that going on under the hood with stack versus heap memory allocations and so on. But I'm going to leave that to you to read up on more if you're interested in the links provided. The key things to take away with this entire completion handler concept, especially for beginners, is the syntax. Okay, you give it a name. You say @escaping if it needs to be escaping, if it's an asynchronous closure, and then parentheses, arrow, parentheses, and in the first set of parentheses, you set the types for the variables that you are going to pass back. And you can have more than one. You can have string, bool, and then another string, for instance. And then in the completion, you would just pass those all those values. Okay. So that's if you need to return more than one thing. So just being aware that you can do that. But yeah, it's not too bad once you've done it a few times. The syntax just comes automatically, and you just type it out and use it. All right, so with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and refactor these other two functions. Coming back to our view controller, I'm going to grab the getCatImage URL and the getCatImage data. I'm going to cut that, come back over to our network service, and paste those here. And then we're also going to need our base URL for the image. And I'm going to come back here and paste that up here at the top as well. And one thing that I think confused some people is I should probably make these match. So I'm going to take out the /v1 here and then append that to the image endpoint right here. That way those are consistent. Our base URL ends with the .com, and then our endpoint have the slash and then the rest of the endpoint right there. So now this one isn't going to be quite as straightforward as our make fact request because we have to, by necessity, make two network calls. One to get the image URL string, and then a second one to make that, to take that string, that image URL, and get back the image data and turn it into a UIImage that we can actually use. So we are going to have some nested callbacks somewhere, and we can decide whether to have that nesting in our view controller or here in our network service. And I am going to have that be here in our network service. I'm going to create a new function that returns the final UIImage and handles both the other functions. All right. And then another thing that I want to do is this getCatImage data. This is a function that takes in a URL string and makes a UIImage. It's not actually specific to cats or anything like that. So I'm just going to rename this to download image. Okay. So I'm going to save that and let's get started. First thing we're going to do is create that new function. Like I said, I'm going to call this func download cat image. And what we're going to do is we're going to first get the image URL. Then we are going to use the image URL to download the image and pass that into our completion handler. So this function, its end result, its purpose is to return a UIImage in its closure. So I'm going to put in our completion handler here again. See if you can type it out on your own first. So we say completion at escaping parentheses, arrow parentheses, and then inside of the first one we set the type for what we want to pass into the closure, which is a UIImage, and that's probably not going to work because we need to import UIKit first. Okay. All right, so that's looking good. We have our function download cat image, and we are going to be ending up with a UIImage over in our view controller. All right, so now we need to modify our getCatImage URL pretty much exactly the same way that we did our make fact request. So as a challenge, I want you to pause the video and convert this function into a function that can be called and return a string URL in a closure, okay? So give that a shot. All right, so I hope you tried that out. If not, and if you didn't get it, that's okay. We're gonna do it right here together. So like I said, this cat image URL, this is going to return in the completion handler an image URL. So we're gonna say completion at escaping, open, close parentheses, arrow parentheses, and here in the first parentheses, it is the type, which is going to be string. And all we have to do now is down here where we were previously calling the next function, instead we are going to say completion image URL. Very good. So now we can call this function get cat image URL right up here in our download cat image function. So I'm going to say get cat image URL. And once that's done, we are going to get back, and I'm just pressing return to get these auto-completes. And we're going to name this variable that we get back, which is a string image URL. Okay. So now we have the image URL. We've made that API request and it's come back. We have it here in our closure. So now we're going to make our second network request to download the image and turn that image data into a UI image. Okay, so for this to work, we take in a URL string, but we also have a closure. So I'm going to say completion, and it's the same thing when you also have other parameters. You just add a comma, and you'll usually do the completion at the very end after any of the other parameters in your function. Okay, so I'm going to say at escaping, and then parentheses, arrow, parentheses. And here we're going to be returning we're going to be passing into the closure a UI image. So I'm going to save that, and then down here I'm not going to get onto the main thread here yet. Well, you know what? Yeah, let's be on the main thread right here. So I'm going to say dispatch queue.main.async. Then I'm going to say completion, and we are going to pass in the image that we created from the data that we got in this network request. So I'm going to save that, come back up here. And here in our download cat image, we first get the cat image URL, and then we say self.download image, and we pass it the image URL. Then I'm going to press tab and enter, and then delete. And this is an actual image. And we're done here, so we can just say completion and image. Okay, so this completion right here, this is for the main parent function download cat image, and we're returning a UI image here. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit, get rid of any of these extra spaces and comments. Save that, make sure we don't have any errors over here. We do have one in the view controller since we changed how these functions are being called. But I think that's looking pretty good here. All right, so coming back to our view controller, now we need to call our get cat image URL, or now we're calling it something else. What are we calling it? Download cat image from our network service. So I'm going to say network service .instance.download cat image, and in our closure, in our completion handler, we get back a UI image. So I'm going to call that image, and then here, now that we have the image, we can set it. We can say self.catImageView.image is equal to image. And just going to do a little cleanup real quick. Save that and run it. Make sure everything is still working as expected. Click, and hey, there's our cat images and our cat facts. And our view controller is looking much cleaner now. One final thing to add is here in our view controller, when you have escaping closures, you need to use weak self in order to avoid retain cycles. And I'm not going to go too deep into that in this video, but I'll leave some links for further reading into that topic as well. But the way that you do it is right here. You say square brackets and you say weak self. And then below that, you make sure that we still have a reference to this view controller. We say guard let self equals self, else return, okay? And then we're gonna do the same thing on this one right here. So we're gonna say weak self, and again, guard let self equals self, else return. Save that, run it one more time just to make sure everything is still working as expected. And it is very good. So yeah, that's great. Our view controller is looking real good. We have our network service all set up and we're sitting pretty. All right, I'll see you all in the next one.